Alright, so my first step is always go to the reference, isn't it? So, in the Unity scripting reference again, type in GetComponent. GetComponent, GameObject GetComponent. Let's just see what happens even if we go to that one. And then let's just cross-reference that if we click GameObject GetComponent. Okay, so it looks like it's giving some different examples depending on what you click on. But essentially, when we look at the definition of the command, it's exactly the same. Get component of a type that returns a component. Let's look at the other one again. The get component, we're asking for a type and it returns a component. So that's what we're dealing with. We'll use the game object. Okay, this is interesting. I don't know if this is going to break here, because I don't very much use this myself, because I like to use the inspector a lot and assign things automatically. I don't like leaving situations where things could break. Anyway, let's start off. Variable, we're going to make this our target renderer. Let's see if we can just grab the renderer component. So, as we're talking about the components and typecasting variables, this will be the same for our scripts. But at the moment we're looking for a renderer. So we typecast this renderer. This is what we're going to be storing in this variable here. Now, I don't know if I can get the renderer. We've already found the target. So let's go target dot get component. That is coming up in the IntelliSense. We're obviously going to be allowed to get component off a transform as well as get component off a game. Excellent. So what are we looking for on the target? We want to get the component renderer. And there we have it. Now that's not very smart, is it? Because we need to store that in the variable. So our target renderer will equal the target, which is a transform. So our target get component will get the render component off the target. Now what can we do with that? Just so that we can prove we've got it apart from in the inspector. Let's even bring up the renderer component. Renderer. There are some variables that we can play with so we can prove that we have found the object and we've also gotten the component. Okay, we have a renderer, and the renderer has a material variable. Now I wanted to show something, yes, there we go. And the material has a color variable. So I've thrown it way ahead here, but this example is a perfect example of what I'm trying to show here. So we can, when we have the renderer component, we can say, okay, on that renderer, let's get the material, let's get the color of that material, and let's just change it. So I don't have to muck around trying to import textures and show things like that. So let's try and implement this. See if we can change the color of our player. So we have stored a reference to the renderer through the get component. So our target renderer dot and the material on that renderer and the color of the material. And we're going to make it color, let's just make it white. That'll be very obvious. Okay, so we'll save this script. Let's go back and check for compilation errors. Okay, so this is the MPC that is finding our target, which we said our target is going to be named player. And you see our player is currently has a material with the color of green. Let's confirm that. Okay. So there's the material on the renderer. If we bring up the material, yep, it's just the color green. So if you remember, we said we're going to set it to white. Now let's watch the inspector and watch the screen at the same time. There we go. Then that's quite clear and obvious that's changed color. So again, we can ask through the inspector, yep, that's the player. What about the renderer? Yep, that's the renderer. This is a component of the player. Let's look down here. Okay, our material was green. It still is green in our project view. But in our hierarchy, in this scene, see instance, we have modified this. This is not the same. This is a copy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The idea is we've changed the color to white. Okay, now I tend to waffle on, and I don't think there's anything else I can explain there. I know it's a confusing and tricky subject, but hopefully that's shown how it works. I don't know if we can do this another way. What else can we do? Let's see if we can do the whole thing again, but from the perspective of the player. Okay, so let's make another script for the player. Create a JavaScript, and this will again be game object find example, but this will be for our player. Okay, so let's start again. Let's not even copy paste anything. Let's start completely again. So, variable, let's just even give it a different name. Alright, so let's just say this will be our enemy. We know very well it's going to be our enemy. So we need to typecast this. What are we going to store? Well, as I said, we can store the game object or the transform. Let's even keep this simple and show something different. Game object is what we're going to typecast it to. This is probably where I should have started. Okay, so enemy is going to equal game object dot find. And what are we trying to find? We're trying to find a game object that is named something. Now, what's our enemy called in our scene? NPC, capital N, capital P, capital C. NPC. Alright? Now, we haven't gone dot anything because we're asking to store a variable that is of type game object. Now, game object find returns a game object. Okay? So again, let's set up the scene. This time this script is for the player. So we'll whack it on there. And we're looking for the enemy. Let's just hit play. And there we have it again. This time the variable is of type game object. But it's still done its job. There it is over there. That's the game object find. Now, what components can we muck around with? Because we haven't got anything else on there. Capture collider. Alright, let's access the collider component, and then let's set is trigger. What else could we do? We could access the rigid body component. We could turn off gravity and give it some force. See, this is it. You can do absolutely anything you want. Once you know how to look at a game object and then see a game object is basically an empty with all these things attached to it. And they're just components. And we just call on these components. And we can look at the scripting reference to see what different things are on that component. It's like we looked at the renderer. We have materials, shared materials. Yeah, we're looking at the variables on the component here. Okay, let's even look at collider. What can we muck around with the collider? don't actually have some great examples there, do we? Let's see if we can get rid of. There we go. So again, we've got all this inheritance stuff. We're just looking at this kind of thing. Where's the trigger? We've got there it is. These are the inherited variables. So they're a bit mixed up and mixed around. Okay, so if we're going to find, sorry, we've already found. We're going to get component. We're just going to get the character. We're going to get the collider component. And what can we do to the trigger? So the collider, we can set that boolean to true or false. So let's just finish up our example with that. So we found our enemy as a type game object. Now we're going to say, no, we've got to create a variable and store it in. Beg your pardon. A variable, and now this is going to be our enemy collider. So we're storing a reference to the collider. So it is of type collider. I was waiting for you to answer. Okay, let's do this one right now. I've already done it once. So we have our enemy collider. And what's it going to equal? Well, we have a reference to our enemy already. Now, from the enemy, we're going to get component. Component. Okay, what component are we trying to access? Well, we're trying to access the collider. And we're trying to store a reference to the collider after we've grabbed it. Now what can we do to the collider now that we've stored it? Enemy collider is trigger. And it's false at the moment, so let's set it to true. Okay, save that out. Let Unity compile. Now this is on the player. So let's just check before I hit play, okay? Because I'm going to be swapping back and forth. We have the capsule collider is trigger. There it is there. So it's set to false. Alright, let's just even watch that when we first hit play. There we go. And because he's a rigid body, but he's now a trigger, he's fallen through. That's normal expected behavior. Now let's look from the player's point of view. So we found our NPC as a game object, and we've grabbed the collider component off the NPC. It's even shown. We only asked for a generic collider, and it specifically told us, yeah, I saw your collider. It's a capsule collider. And again, if we click on that, it shows us it's on the NPC. Okay, so again, before I over-explain things, I'm going to leave it here.